Man, our 3-year-old son, Breck, he has recently been really into the movie Iron Man. Anyone seen Iron Man? All right, so I'm way behind the game. And when I say recently, I mean just within the past 2 weeks, because about 2 weeks ago, we were sitting on the couch together looking for a movie. We were flipping through Netflix, and we stumbled upon Iron Man. And I've got to be honest with y'all, it just sucked me in right away. And if you're not familiar with the storyline of Iron Man, it's pretty simple. There's this billionaire industrialist and genius inventor, and his name is Tony Stark, and he's played by Robert Downey Jr., and he's overseas conducting this weapons test, and while he's kidnapped by a bunch of terrorists, and they force him to build this devastating weapon so that they could use this weapon, but instead of building that weapon, he designs a suit, an armored suit, and he defeats all of his captors and returns to America. He escapes and returns to America. And when he returns to America, he refines this suit and perfects it, and he uses it to combat crime and terrorism. He defeats all the enemies. World peace, movie over. And so for the past couple of weeks, my son has been running around the house being Iron Man. And y'all know how that goes, right? And so that's been my life for the last couple of weeks. But I did not know there was an Iron Man 2 until last Monday. Yes, I get it. I'm way behind the game on this. We were sitting around talking with my sister and brother-in-law, and we were talking about Iron Man, and he says, well, yeah, but an Iron Man 2. And I said, wait a minute. There's an Iron Man 2? So what do you think we did? We watched Iron Man 2. And if you're a bit fuzzy on the storyline of Iron Man 2, the world is now aware that Tony Stark is indeed Iron Man, the man in the suit, and he is facing pressure from all different directions to release this technology to the military, but he doesn't want to because he's fearful that it will get placed into the wrong hands. And as you can imagine, there is a new and dangerous enemy on the scene. And it's a Russian scientist, and he has developed the same technology to create new weapons. He's the one with the whips. That's kind of cool. And he has this personal vendetta against the Stark family, and he goes after Tony Stark. And the cycle of suiting up to conquer the enemy continues. And see, it's kind of funny to watch this movie, both movies, with my son. Because first he's 3 and he doesn't really watch movies. He's kind of up and down. But about every 15 minutes, he'll pose to me this question. Poppy, are they the bad guys? Poppy, are they the bad guys? 15 minutes later. Poppy, are they the good guys? Are they the good guys? And let's just be honest, it can be a bit confusing, right? Because the bad guy does something bad to the good guy, then the good guy does something bad to the bad guy, and then the bad guy retaliates and the good guy retaliates, and it just goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And this is true in movies. It's true among some ex-wives and ex-husbands. It's true in communities. It's true in politics. It's true in nations. You bomb us, we'll bomb you. And the narrative simply says, I can fix this, or we can fix this with another act of violence. Cycles of violence, destruction, harming one another, getting them back, settling the score, I'll teach you a lesson. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in real life. It doesn't work in superhero movies. It just keeps it all in circulation. It just keeps the whole thing going. It's why, by the way, we can have Iron Man 1, 2, 3, and so on. In full disclosure, I have not seen Iron Man 3, but I bet I know the storyline. You know what I mean? So the question I want to pose with you this morning is, as people of faith, what might it look like for you, for us, to disrupt some of these cycles, to step outside of them, to say enough is enough? And by the way, these cycles of violence and harming one another and revenge and retaliation and getting them back, these cycles are as old as dirt. So what I'd like to do with you for the next few minutes is look at a story a weird story from the Old Testament book of Judges, Judges chapter 3. Now, if you haven't read Judges recently, you got to brace yourself a bit, because it's a book that is filled with killing and assassinations and power struggles. It's a bit like the Game of Thrones. Any Game of Thrones fans? Yeah, if you dig that, you're going to dig the book of Judges. But according to the storyteller in Judges, the Israelites have again, you'll notice this word again come up, have again done evil in the sight of the Lord. And because of this, King Eglon, who's the king of neighboring nation of Moab, is now ruling over them. Verse 12, here's how the story goes. And we'll stop periodically and talk about things. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. Getting the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud. Let's pause there for just a moment, because I want you all to notice how the writer uses the name Lord for God here. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. When I copy and paste it, it doesn't do all the caps. But if you look in the scriptures, it's all capitals, and the ORD are just in a smaller font. But see, this name is the same name given to Moses when Moses said, yeah, but God, what do I tell him? Who do I tell him sent me? Remember this story? Exodus chapter 3. The Israelites, they're held in captivity in Egypt, suffering under the oppression of King Pharaoh, being held as slaves. And the Israelites cry out, God, where are you? God, how come you're not rescuing us? How come you're not saving us? How come you're not delivering us? And so God sends a deliverer in Moses. And Moses says, who do I tell him sent me? Well, you tell him I am sent you. Yeah, God, that's good, but that's not good enough. I mean, who am I going to tell him when Pharaoh asks who sent me? What do I say? You tell him the Lord sent you. And the Lord, this name is used over and over and over again to describe the one who rescued them, the one who brought them out of Egypt, the one who brought them into a new way of living. And they were told when they were brought out to never forget their story. Remember who they are. Remember this new way of life. And one of the ways to never forget, they were told, was to extend that same love and grace and generosity to everyone around them. But they keep forgetting. I know you and I would never do that, but they keep forgetting. They keep losing the plot of the story. And now they're living under the oppression of King Eglon, and it goes on for 18 years. They cry out, and now there's a deliverer. It's so much of the story of the Old Testament. Israel does something, they live in oppression, they cry out, and God always hears their cries. So God raises up this man named Ehud to deliver the Israelites. And what's the first thing we're told about Ehud? This is where the story gets weird, so hang with me. Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Jerah the Benjamite. The Israelites sent him with a tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword with about a cubit long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. Well, let's just stop there a minute. Why would any of this be important? Why would the storyteller include these types of details like he's left-handed? Because back then, like now, being left-handed was a bit of a minority. In fact, raise your hand if you're a lefty. I am. All right, all four of us in the room. Yeah, it's a minority, right? But back then, even more so, because you did certain things with your left hand. Things I won't go into in this service, but you did certain things with your left hand. So it was frowned upon to be left-handed. You were considered weird. It was an oddity. There weren't left-handers in that world. Now, if you're left-handed and you want quick access to your dagger, I mean, if you're going to pack heat, where are you going to strap it? Not your left inner thigh. I mean, that's awkward. If you're lefty, that's like awkward, right? That's not quick access. But if you strap it to your right inner thigh, you see what I mean? Much quicker access. Now, if you were going before the king in the king's palace, there would undoubtedly be some guards standing in the front, and you would get a bit of a pat down. They would certainly check the left thigh, but probably not check the right thigh because it wasn't a right-handed culture. You see what I mean? You see where we're going? Ehud is clever and crafty and sophisticated. Let's keep going. He presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. That's an important detail. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way those who had carried it. But on reaching the stone images near Gilgal, he himself went back to Eglon and said, "Your Majesty, I have a secret for you, a secret message for you." The king said to his attendants, "Leave us." And they all left. So now it's just Ehud and the king. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Yes, that is in the scriptures. Even the handle sank in after the blade and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out and the fat closed in over it. You see why it's a bit like Game of Thrones? Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, "He must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace." They waited to the point of embarrassment. I don't know how long that is, but I think it's a long time. But when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their lord, lowercase lord, fallen to the floor dead. Ehud then escapes. Then he proceeds to blow this trumpet, and he announces to all the Israelites that they have indeed been given victory, and they go on to slaughter 10,000 Moabites. Then Moab becomes subject to Israel for the next 80 years. Power is reversed. Ehud was clever and crafty and sophisticated, much like Iron Man. And his act gave them victory. They didn't suffer under the oppression of a king, a foreign king, for the next 80 years. So maybe it worked. I mean, maybe violence really does work. Maybe retaliation really does work. That's how chapter 3 ends. Guess how chapter 4 begins? Very first verse of chapter 4. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Are you kidding me? You mean it didn't work? But he was so crafty and clever and sophisticated in his retaliation and his getting them back. What do you mean it didn't work? He was supposed to be like the final superhero. You mean we're right back into those same old cycles? Seriously? Yeah, when you read chapter 4, and it doesn't stop at chapter 4, by the way. It keeps going. But chapter 4, they were again brutally oppressed by another foreign king for another 20 years until they cried out. And guess who heard their cries? Because God always hears their cries even when they screw the whole thing up. You know, on the face of it, this book is so brutal and bloody and violent and gory. Why read this in a religious service? I mean, why do religious folk have anything to do with this book? And I can't tell you how often I hear comments like, well, yeah, that's the God of the Old Testament. Just full of violence and rage and anger and wrath. That's the God of the Old Testament. We got to get to Jesus in the New Testament. That, my friends, is a dishonest reading of the text. Where was God in this story? Again and again and again and again, saving them, rescuing them, delivering them, calling them to a better way of life, calling them to remember their story and demonstrating that remembrance through showing love, kindness, generosity, compassion to everyone around them. But they keep forgetting who they are. They keep losing the plot. They keep getting stuck in these same old cycles, and all the violence, all the hatred, all the revenge, all the retaliation, it just stays in circulation. You see, my brothers and sisters, as people of faith, what does it look like to put down the double-edged sword? What would it look like for you, for us, to take the hatred, the violence, and the retaliation out of circulation, to step outside of the cycle? Because, see, the myth of redemptive violence is the illusion that if somebody does something wrong or unjust or violent to you, you can fix it by doing something wrong or unjust or violent back to them. And see, if I'm honest, my natural impulse says, yeah, it'll work. This time it'll work. Because you really need to understand what he did to me, what she did to me, what they did to me, what they did to us. This time it'll work because, look, this time I'm going to be so clever and crafty and sophisticated in my retaliation, not like the other person. Oh, it'll work. I got to get them back. They bombed us, we got to bomb them. More and harder, of course. How's it working? How's it working in your personal life? How's that thinking working in the political madness that we are surrounded by day in and day out? How's it working? Is any of it really working? Well, Pastor, you just don't know what he did to me. You just don't know what kinds of wounds they created. I have to get them back. I have to do with them what they did to me. Really? Really? You're going to let someone's behavior determine when you throw your moral code out the window? Since when is that a good way to live? When is that a good way to live? What would it look like to put down the double-edged sword? Well, Pastor, that might make me look weak. I don't like to look weak. That's where the Apostle Paul kind of nailed it, didn't he? First century follower of Jesus. Picking up on the teachings of Jesus. He said, when you are weak, you are strong. When you walk the way of the cross, you are strong. Who wants to live that way, though? Who wants to live that way? You see, my brothers and sisters, as people of faith, as followers of Jesus, the way to expose these cycles is to actually die to these cycles, to step out of them, to say enough is enough, it isn't working. And it is the way of the cross. It's about dying to that whole old system of us versus them. You know what I mean? You know, it's interesting. Nelson Mandela, he was imprisoned for, 27 years due to apartheid in South Africa? 27 years of being unjustly imprisoned. And when he was released, you remember the photos we all saw? Like this and a big smile? And do you remember what he didn't talk about? He didn't talk about, well, you whites that kept me in here, now we're going to teach you a lesson. Now we're going to show you what it's like to really be oppressed. Now we're going to show you what it's like to have the boot on your neck. Now we're going to teach you a lesson. By the way, does anyone really learn a lesson when you go in to teach them a lesson? No, it doesn't work that way. What did Nelson Mandela talk about? Do you remember? He talked about us. Us. And when he was talking about us, he was talking about all of South Africa, blacks and whites together. When he talked about us, he was calling us to a deeper kind of us, not an us versus them, but an all of us together. And see, in doing so, he was taking all the violence, all the hatred, all the revenge, all the retaliation out of circulation. He was saying no to the cycle, stepping outside of the cycle. What would it look like for you, for us, to put down the double-edged sword? to say enough is enough. I want to close with a quote from a biblical scholar by the name of Walter Wink. I've talked about Walter Wink here before. He's done lots of work around what we have come to know as the myth of redemptive violence. And in this book, I highly recommend, it's called Engaging the Powers. He says this: is there no escape from this myth of redemptive violence? Yes, there is, but it is difficult. To face the fear of enemies would finally require us to acknowledge our own inner evil. And that would cost us all our hard-earned self-esteem. We would have to change, struggling daily to transform or redeem our shadow side. We would have to see ourselves as no different in kind from our enemy, however different he may be in degree. It would mean seeing God in the enemy as we learn to see God in ourselves, a God who loves and forgives and can transform even the most evil person or society in the world. Amen.